Hello, everyone. It's Mark Andersen here from Capital One. Welcome to this DevOps webinar, and we're going to talk about kind of the recipe for DevOps success, Capital One style. The goals of this webinar, we're going to tell you about Capital One's DevOps journey. We're going to describe some of the successes and challenges that we've had along the way. And one of my goals is to give you at least one actionable item to take away. Sometimes a lot of these talks are high level in nature. I wanted to make sure that there's a few discrete things that you can take away and take one back to your own companies and your day-to-day jobs. So who am I? I'm Mark Andersen. Note the different spelling in the last name, and I'm number 2 in the email address. There's a few of me at Capital One. I went to University of Illinois in Urbana-Champaign. I've been at Capital One for the last 2 years. And at Capital One, I've been the Director of DevOps for Capital One Auto Finance, and I'm also the Capital One Cloud Account Lead for Plano. So I have a few different roles. So who's Capital One? So we are more than just credit cards. We are auto lending, retail banking, commercial banking, etc. So we're a startup in bank years, been around for about 30 years, and we're all in on DevOps. We're also all on the public cloud, and they go well together. We're also pushing very hard on open source and leveraging open source technologies, and also producing some of our own products in the open source community for people to use. So examples being Hygeia and Cloud Custodian. So everyone's kind of got a, what does DevOps mean to you? Here's kind of our slide on it. Is really, we want to deliver high quality working software faster. So high quality being, it's reliable, secure, usable, and performant. Working as in we're making sure we're accomplishing our end users' goals and giving them value. And then really it's how do we do this in a faster way? Everything is about speed to delivery and getting that feedback. So how do we add that component and do things faster than we did before? So let me take you to kind of how it was in Capital One Auto Finance before DevOps. So, we were on-prem and we had very inconsistent releases. We had many handoffs between many teams for even the smallest change. We had manual steps that were documented in spreadsheets. We had people that actually whose whole job was to manage the spreadsheet and to, track, have we done step number 63 before 64, et cetera. And environments took many months to set up and had considerable drift and inconsistency in them. So we kind of looked at this in a few phases for our transformation. So phase 1 was starting to use some of our configuration management automation tools. So in our example is Chef, but we're doing this on-prem. So, and we focused primarily on the automation of building up middleware and application software. So your things like the J2E middleware pieces, things that you're going to put on the operating system, etc. That got us part of the way there. Really what kind of we hit in phase 2 was we decided to go all in the cloud. So we went from just looking kind of configuration management to then looking at the full infrastructure automation and growing into the delivery pipelines. And then currently, we've done that, but how do we go from just doing it to getting good at it? So implementing robust pipelines, adding more quality checks where we need them, and then growing to a level where how do we have the consistency where we can kind of have pre-approved releases that can be set up in a way that you don't have the normal change waiting periods ahead of time. We still do change control, those things, but how do we do that in a more automated way and in a way that is with the speed component that our business customers need. So where did we start? So we started with 2 legacy applications, and we got together a SWAT team in one room for 2 months. And so the SWAT team had developers, infrastructure, production support, and what this did is it forced a cross-team, cross-responsibility collaboration among them. So we got those disciplines together. We added a few professional services resources to address some of the knowledge gaps and to kickstart, kickstart using the technologies and focus on automating the build, deployment of the infrastructure, and then also the application deployment. I won't talk about tools a lot, but just to talk through, we use Jenkins, AWS CloudFormation, and Chef in the process. So after we did that and learned a lot, and we stumbled some, but we learned as we went, we moved on to address 4 more applications, kind of an increasing complexity. And then once we completed that, we started bringing on more applications, and we started having the application teams drive themselves, and we kind of disbanded the SWAT team. We felt that we were getting enough traction and knew what we're doing enough to go forward. So what worked? So automation really does work and provides value. So when testing our first application, we went through some performance tests and it was pretty bad. So we changed, a property sizing some of the servers and made it a size bigger. Reran the deployment automation, and then 20 minutes later we were resized and had a successful test. So if you look at that compared to the process that we had before, where we had to get someone from infrastructure on, or the OS virtualization guys, and resize a VM, that took days and sometimes even weeks to do. So the feedback loop and the how do we make changes and deliver faster, this was one of many examples that it was really successful. Removing the handoffs between teams with the SWAT team was huge. It developed kind of some shared goals saying, hey, we want to deliver this application into the cloud in an automated way. So it changed the words to we instead of they. It was more part of the team. And the people from the different disciplines learned each other's roles and learned to respect the complexity of the roles. So the app teams creating infrastructure automation, finding out that there's some real subtleties in the OS layer and packages and how to do that the right way, while the infrastructure guys knowing and seeing the complexity in the applications and how those work. So it really brought them together and kind of cross-pollinating. People started to learn each other's and respect each other's different roles. It also, the speed of delivery increased, less waiting time on other teams. You get faster feedback loops for the teams, and there's more of a test and fail culture. An example of that was where before you kind of ask for permission, or people would ask each other, hey, I want to do X, Y, Z, or I want to try a new feature out. People would go ask architects, ask others, ask for approval. It took us a little time to unwind, but turned it into someone saying, hey, I don't know, but go and dev and test it and see if it works or not. It really doesn't matter what we think. It matters what happens in reality. So what didn't work so well? There's always things that don't work well, and I think these are the things that I definitely want people to share, so if they go through this process, they can learn something and manage through these. So trying to automate everything all at once. We did that, and it created really long pipelines with long deployment cycles. It also required us to solve too many new problems all at the same time. So we had some times where nothing worked, and in doing that, it was a little demoralizing the team. And of course, as you share status reports and other things, you get a lot of visibility and feedback as to why things aren't working. So that was something that didn't go too well. The automation handoff to the application teams, kind of coming out of the SWAT teams, although we tried to do our best in education, some of them just didn't have the training and knowledge to grow and support it. That process should have been longer and more immersive. I think everyone thinks that, have a few training sessions, just going to work and the other team's going to get it, but everything was new for the app team. So they just didn't have enough time to grow and learn that, the same as kind of the SWAT team that was together for 2 months, the initial 2 months for those first apps in that room. So we need to do a lot better job of that. And the tools were set up to support kind of a non-DevOps environment. And so this was an interesting one, is as you shift from deploying, once every other week, once a month, once a quarter, how your availability of your tools and how they're set up needs to change. If you move to, I want to deploy, once a week, once a day, et cetera. They have higher levels of rigor that's needed supporting them. An example would be before, if Nexus was down, you just needed Nexus up for when you were doing deployments, and so that was fine. But now, whatever artifact management tool you use in the cloud or deploying often, that artifact repository has got to be up all the time. And once you throw the cloud in there with auto scaling, it's even required to run your application. So as we shift, just the tools were set up initially in the way how we were working before, and we needed to change those processes to help us support us in the new world. And it took a bunch of people to kind of get through that change curve. So I want to go through kind of what I would say is the top 10 ingredients for DevOps success. So number 10 is, don't just have the DevOps engineers know the automation. So the DevOps engineers need to teach the Agile pod and the developers how things work and how things get fixed. So the goal in the end of all this is to have the developers be self-sufficient and move fast. And to do this, the more the developers understand, the more they can fix issues on their own. They don't have to wait for help, wait on someone else. They don't have to create a ticket, etc. This next bullet is kind of looking for an analogy here is, maybe treat automation kind of like a car. Teach the application team how to drive and how to change the oil and do care and feeding, but not how to build the engine. So is the app team going to understand every little nuance around CloudFormation and deep networking? That's going to be a challenge, right? That's a little too much for them. But can they understand the pipeline and how things get deployed, so when things break, they know where to look and how this all works? Yes, they can start there and grow as they use it more and more. But what you got to be careful of is just the handoff to another team and saying, hey, someone else created this, I'm going to stop and wait till I get a hold of them and I can't do any work. So number 9 is prepare yourself for your on-prem and legacy software to be challenging to automate. You're going to have to be creative. We have at Capital One a lot of the same infrastructure that other Fortune 500 companies have, and a lot of that software isn't made quite right. It's easy to read the books and say, hey, here's just how we automate everything, but when the COTS product doesn't provide you the config file that you can save off or export, it's tough. So the biggest thing is cluster discovery. If you do anything with creating a cluster and shared information, whether it's state or anything else, the on-prem software usually isn't built for the dynamic nature of how often you deploy, replacing things, and also the cloud. And so you will have to make some choices as to how far you get to automate and deploy some of these things. You will not be able to do some things perfectly, but be careful of not getting some value of how they're set up. Number 8, I kind of talked about this before, but don't try to do everything at once. Focus on 1 or 2 things first. If you try to do everything, you'll just be too much. Do smaller batches. We talk about in kind of the agile development world. Bring that same concept here. It's part of the same thoughts. So smaller chunks mean you get to celebrate more too. So as you're going through some of this change curve, you're going to get kind of beaten down with some of the change and some of the issues. If you do smaller chunks, you can have some more of those sooner incremental successes. So, and celebrate like Dude Perfect. So for those that don't know Dude Perfect, it's a bunch of guys that do trick shots, and they celebrate and run around, after they successfully do one, and do crazy things like throwing a football through a basketball hoop from the top row of a football stadium. So, but make sure you celebrate your incremental successes. That way you'll keep your team, the people around you, motivated. If you do too much, it's going to be such a long road to get to that end. Sometimes it gets demoralizing sometimes. So if you're picking tools or even building them, make sure they have APIs. So this is, and most things kind of do going forward, but there's a few ones that you'll notice that don't. But APIs are the enabler for for this DevOps and automation journey, and also for the cloud. So even if it's a bad API, it's better than no API. If you're API first, then your application, your users of it can orchestrate these tools together, and you can always build the UI after that. But you'll notice pretty quickly when you run into tools that don't have an API, they will be significant barriers to you automating everything and delivering faster. Number 6 is speed matters. So long feedback loops are bad feedback loops. So if you automate everything the first time, it's going to take a really long time to get that feedback. You're going to have to look to parallelize everything, and especially your functional tests. That's where we see a lot of problems, is people have a lot of functional tests that take hours. If it takes a few hours to get that feedback, you've moved on to other things. Are you really going to wait an hour for your pipeline to complete? That's not a good feedback loop. It's not in one of our goals around delivering faster and giving feedback on how well we're doing on the quality and security. So I like the picture that I have is, remember in doubt, use full throttle. Might not improve the situation, but it'll end the suspense. So this way, if you get that feedback, you'll be able to keep people engaged and fix the issues that you're looking at. Unit testing is still needed. So don't just focus on functional tests. They tend to be slower and a little more brittle. As you are automating all the things and delivering often, you'll see a trend for people to just build out more and more functional tests at the expense of unit tests. So unit tests are fast and stable. So they give your developers feedback. They should be able to be run on your laptop or anything else. Not saying functional tests are bad, but you still need both, and don't favor just functional tests over unit tests. Also, you probably need to consider mocking out some of your functional dependencies for speed and stability. If you're depending on another system, especially if it's in dev environment, sometimes those aren't always up, or someone else is delivering changes there. So you don't want to have the aggregate of all your dependencies affect your build and your feedback loops on how well you're doing. So considering mocking out some of those, especially the ones that are less stable than others. But that way you can get the feedback on your tests faster. So number 4, networking security is hard. It's even harder for developers. If you get into doing DevOps in the cloud, you're going to get into networking. So you need to help train your agile pods and people who are doing it on how to do it. So one example too is centralizing your log collection. Let everyone see the information and create things in a developer language so they have the information that they need. Developers don't usually understand CIDR blocks or complex networking, but they know, hey, if that CIDR block is really, or that IP address is really my LDAP service, or the service that my business service that I'm talking to, that's in a language that they can understand. So consider that from their point of view, some of the things that you're giving them, how to make it into more of a developer language. So number 3, is avoid creating the DevOps silo to replace your infrastructure silo. So, one of the challenges is, if you had these infrastructure teams before, if you just create yet another DevOps team and they're kind of siloed and they're just working with tickets, you might have improved a few things, but you're not getting the actual flow of delivery from the agile pods that they're waiting on tickets. So it kind of dovetails in number 2 is focus on removing and reducing the handoffs. How do you create self-service things for the things you can't get the developers direct access to? So if you can't give them access to create LDAP groups or security groups, give them a tool to do it the right way, or solve the 80% problem. But if you put everything behind a manual process, it's really going to slow them down. So give them the tools in their way that can work for them. And number 1 is, don't let great get in the way of being very good. So deliver something, get feedback, and do more. If you're waiting for it to be absolutely perfect, you'll never deliver. Like those unicorns kind of don't exist, or they're really tough to find. Strive to be a horse. So you're going to probably read, everyone reads about things being perfect and and you know, everything is secure and everything is full tests. When you get into it, you're going to find out that you're going to run into a lot of challenges. So work on just getting better at first, and don't let perfection get in the way of that. So this is you know, something as I've talked to many people and I see within some of my experiences what are some of the patterns? You know, we talked about this a little, but the way that service teams like DBA, security, networking, infrastructure need to interact with the Agile pods is different. You know, previously the service teams tend to be optimized to their team and their resource efficiency and their internal workflows. But now with the shift to building products and services, they need to be building those and be optimized to the workflow of the Agile pod. So understanding that the service team's customer is really the Agile pod is really fundamental, and if you can get that right, all the kind of automation things we can start to fall into place. So the service teams really need to optimize the solution that's most optimized for the Agile pods and not for the audit or security or, you know, database leadership, etc. So I'm not saying don't do security or anything. We all need these things. We actually do a lot of it. But with these teams and these professionals in these areas, you need to figure out how do you apply their smarts in the way that is best in the Agile pod workflow, not in optimizing for the security team and come over here. So that's the real point there, is figuring out how you're going to optimize your delivery of your knowledge there. Some examples of this is, so the DBA is creating automation to create new database instances. So, you know, if they're getting a ticket from someone else to create it and hand it back, that's not super efficient, right? The app team is waiting for it. Why don't you create a job or an API that creates it for them in the right way, that's tracked and inventoried the way the DBAs need it to, but it's optimized, the experience is optimized to the Agile pod. So, you know, you create the instance, set up monitoring, set up alerting. You know, example, let's just take AWS for a second, would be, you know, you could either give them the CFT or you could give them a Jenkins job that runs the CFT, does some monitoring on top of it, and the necessary alerting and tracking that you need on your databases. So, but the important thing is getting it into a flow that works for the Agile pod and not for the, you know, the database team. Another example is kind of monitoring teams creating processes to onboard monitoring tools. How do you do that in the new world, to create it through an API or through a config file? So that way it's kind of less than 20 minutes. If you do it manually, more and more people use it, you know, the wait time grows to like 2 weeks, a week or two. But you know, a great monitoring tool with a manual and slow onboarding process to either onboard or even change it is a tool that people won't use. If you have something that can get into the Agile pod's hands super fast and easy with little friction and on their terms, that will be a tool that they'll want to use. So and a final simple example is like a security team having an API to create 80 groups or like IAM roles or whatever kind of security groups you have in your environments. You know, how do we make sure that there's a process that happens in a fairly quick amount of time, and call it minutes rather than days or weeks? And if people need to use that within their applications, consider an AD group or an LDAP group, having the implementation code of how to extract that information out, check what users are in there. So how do you make that process super easy for the Agile team? So that's kind of the theme, is you know, how do you have the service teams treat Agile pods as their customer and optimize their service and the value they provide in the best way for them, not the service team. So that's the end of my presentation. We kind of wanted to open up and to address questions. I think if you send questions in, they'll show up in my chat here pretty soon, and then I'll go through and address some of these. So, all right, we have one. The first question is, you know, with cloud platforms offering things like Google's App Engine and Elastic Beanstalk, amongst others, developers are getting tasked with managing and running the code that we right in production? Does it mean the ops is going to go away, and how can we keep our code running at scale? I don't think ops goes away at all. Actually, I think ops actually gets more important, but I think some of the things and how it works does change. There's very specific things that ops does that are hard for a developer to know and to understand. These platforms help with some of that and some of the scale, but what I would say some of the infrastructure guys in operations would shift though a little to is how do they go through and test these platforms and show the patterns of what's the right way to use them and what's the way that's scaled so they auto-scale correctly or they're resilient to failure, something Chaos Monkey or Chaos Engineering asks, to say that, hey, I'm going to provide you with directions and a reference implementation of here's how we need to run in production at scale and let me help you do that. So these platforms are good. They abstract some of the details away, but there's still a how do we test these things automatically? How do we get some of that knowledge to the into the applications where the app team might not be thinking about it? So next question is a little more specific to Capital One, but has Capital One organization been structured to transform and being more agile? Is Capital One IT aligned with DevOps and Agile? And the answer is yes, we're organized and operating in an agile way across the board. There's some areas that are probably more progressive than others in it, but we see the value in aligning with that. Now, what I would say is there's a trickle-down effect of, the Agile and product pods of how do you transform those other supporting service teams and supporting that. And that really gets back to those last two slides around knowing who your customer is and knowing how you have to support them to make them better. If you have everyone in the Agile process, but then you have something with a 2 or 3 week kind of delay or lead time, that really is going to stick out, and it makes it really challenging. So, and we still have things like that here. So we're not done by far, but we are definitely aligned that from the top that we want to be working in a DevOps and Agile-like delivery culture. Stand by. I'm getting more and more questions. As an infrastructure engineer starting to do more work with Amazon and Azure, is there a clear route to becoming a DevOps engineer? There's a real question of what is a DevOps engineer title? To me, and everyone kind of has an opinion here, to me it's someone that focuses on the delivery pipeline, including the infrastructure, to make delivery automated and faster and give that feedback of that application to the team. So, is there a clear path? I would say knowing the automation technologies is an important start, but I would also say knowing the application, and I think there's an important piece that was kind of, and maybe I buried it in the SWAT team kind of talk part, but co-locating and understanding the application. One of the things certain areas in Capital One do is for these DevOps engineers is they're co-located physically with the team that they support. They're kind of a part of the team. So they're the ones helping, teaching folks how some of these technology works, rather than saying, I'm just going to be in this other team over here with a ticket or a handoff or a work item or a story to do. So by doing that, you get a better appreciation of the whole flow, because in the end, we're not doing this just to automate infrastructure. The end goal of this is to deliver that application value faster with more consistency to that. So if we're automating everything, yet we're not getting the feedback very fast with the Agile pod and to the people and the POs and everyone else, then we're not doing it right. So let's see. This is a good one that have often is how important is it to stay public cloud agnostic using technologies? Do you use the cloud-specific technologies like CloudFormation, or do you abstract to infrastructure, kind of platform as a service? So there's a lot of opinions here, and I think it's kind of early, and everyone's has some thoughts. I would say it depends. Sorry, but if you're just going to abstract yourself, saying that I'm not going to use any Amazon, GCP, or Azure specific services and just use compute in a load balancer and some databases, I think you're missing out on some of the enablers that make you go faster. So if I wanted to use an example like DynamoDB in the Amazon world, if you say you're not going to use that because you can't, there's not that exact same service, right, in Azure or GCP, and you're going to run like Cassandra on your own, then you're going to have to take on all the costs of doing it, the people and the resources, and it's not free. So so you got to figure out how much of that you want. Same thing with Lambda. These other clouds have similar but different versions of these technologies and NoSQL and serverless. But if you say that I'm only going to play the least common denominator, you're going to miss out on some of the speed gains that you can get. Like with Dynamo, it's pretty simple, and the developer can learn it compared to Cassandra, which is very powerful. But then you have to have someone that really supports Cassandra, understands how the Cassandra cluster works, and cares and feeds it. So I would say it kind of depends. I do think the one thing that people can rally around to help make it less lock-in is containers is pretty ubiquitous, and at least keeps the application team from tying themselves too close, at least the compute side, to like a cloud provider while giving them some of the benefits. So yes, if you went from Amazon and wanted to move to a different cloud provider, the application team with containers is abstracted a significant amount, and you just have to figure out what container orchestration technology you want to use at the other vendor. So so I would say that's one of the things that eases some of the pain, especially on the app side. All you have to then figure out is kind of what's my middleware orchestration and how does it look like in the different clouds. So let me find the next question here. So this is an excellent one. So how do you involve security in your DevOps processes to keep your flow productive and not get roadblocked? So it goes back to starting with the mindset as to kind of how do you want to optimize that engagement with the app team, and understanding that you want them to go fast. So there's a lot of things with security that you can take care of the 80% case. So how do you give them that control or a way or a job to do that? So call it security groups or IAM roles or permissions. In the maybe on-prem model, where you submit a request, a human would review that and send it back. So with some of the DevOps tools and or the cloud, you can do certain things where you can kind of submit that request, and only certain things the security team really wants to know about that are super sensitive, where some other things are very benign and easy to do. So that is work that your security team should want to say, hey, I don't want to even pay attention to that. I want to automate myself out of that. The other thing is approved patterns of accessing things. If you can get the security team to kind of lay out, hey, here's the way to do this, and I can give you these rights if you follow this pattern, whether it's, accessing databases, accessing object storage, that can help a lot. And understanding that the security team needs to say, how can I have detective or even preventative controls in the environment to detect when things go off the rails? So most of the cloud providers have, with all their APIs, have events and everything else. You can track just about everything that's happening in their cloud. And I would say we have a huge amount of tooling around catching when things aren't going the way we want. So I'm going to use Cloud Custodian as a great example. That's not created by me. It's created by some folks in a different part of Capital One, but it is open source, and it's essentially a fleet management engine. It's very simple in that it just uses config files, but you can create events and actions based off of things that are happening in your environment, to be very specific. You know, there's CloudWatch events in Amazon, and if someone launches something, an EC2 instance, and you require encryption at rest for your EBS volumes, that can be checked, and you can take an action on that if you don't like it. If someone started a unencrypted instance with an unencrypted volume, you just terminate it. And we do stuff like that where if things don't go to meet our policy, and we didn't want to block the developers up front, but you know, within a few seconds of the thing happening, it gets shut down. Another thing is very simple. It's around tagging. You know, who owns this? If you if you want to have certain tags that you put on this, you know, you can enforce that. Same thing with like ELB and ALB and load balancer ciphers. You can say, hey, no matter what you try to configure, I'm going to put the right cipher protocol policy on top of that. So there's a few different ways, and I think the other thing that, at least in my experience and my security professionals that I work with well, is trying to come and see the pods and meet with the teams and see what they're doing, at least on an occasional basis. Obviously, there's not enough security professionals to have like one in every pod, but whether it's once a week, whether it's every other morning, or whether it's kind of in office hours and people come in and review kind of their security needs, having those right checkpoints and making sure that they're kind of aware that's going on and see how the app team flow is with their work. You know, that's really important, really impactful. It makes them see the real problem that's happening, the real impact, and it helps them solve it and kind of develop that trust. It also teaches the app teams too a little, hey, what is the security team really focused on, right? What do they really care about versus other things, so they can kind of help make a more secure environment. So someone had a question about some of my terminology, what I mean by professional services resources. Consultants, you know, from a consulting firm or something. So we had some people that had very experienced cloud background with some consulting firms that helped us with that SWAT team. So that's what I was referring to there. Those will definitely kind of help you jumpstart your journey. And they can also do, if you have them working together, that you can do a lot more train the trainer type things. Let's see. So there's a good question about, you know, ITSM/service management. You know, has it been transformed to more automation and more DevOps-like? It hasn't. We're pushing that way, and it is transforming. And people definitely seem to see the need, especially as things are a little more ephemeral in the DevOps or cloud world, where the tools have to change to adapt. This is where kind of tagging and metadata around your stuff is even more important. We've had to shift some people off the idea where this server is the server I'm going to be on for the next many months, right? That server might go away in a few days, and look at more at, hey, for this application or platform name, we need to group these resources there and see if there's, you know, to track things. So and some of the tooling isn't there yet with some of the service management stuff. We're working with ours and have made some progress, but it's definitely is a shift. So there's a good question here about how has release management changed, and I will say it has changed significantly, and everything has gotten faster, and everybody wants to release more when more and on their terms. So the idea, if you're talking about the purely kind of from a co-release perspective, is that has got easier, but the volume has gone through the roof. We're doing more and more changes. We have smaller applications, so we have more of them. Now, the one thing that has changed some is actually, I think, gotten a little more important is as we have had more applications, the kind of release management piece of it, the kind of business side of features and what are people delivering has got more important because people are moving faster now, and we sometimes see people breaking each other faster if we're not talking. So there's still a need to align around, hey, here are the bigger business objectives that we're trying to deliver, and then here's the things that have to change around them, and we need to change these things in the right order and sequencing. If we have a dependency there and someone's upgrading their service yet their dependent service isn't deployed yet, that's a problem. So it actually almost drives a little more focus on that of what is the sequencing of the releases and getting people to talk. Now, whether you do that informally versus having a full agile release train, it kind of depends on size and scope, but people still need to talk and figure out how these applications build up to deliver a bigger business value. Let's see. Here's a good one around, do we see service technologies like Lambda disrupting the application development landscape and changing how apps are developed? Absolutely. We have some Lambda. We do a lot of Lambda, especially for monitoring events. The developers love it just because they don't have to build up the infrastructure, and it's a lot simpler. But with that simplicity and the smaller Lambda functions, now you kind of have the orchestration challenge, where how do you orchestrate these all together? You see some frameworks coming out, like SAM, I think it's Lambda step functions. I think there's something similar on the Azure side I've seen, but as these things get smaller, it gets easier to deploy, but we need more ways to orchestrate them together. So, will we be doing less raw kind of OS level, package installation automation in the future? Probably with containers and Lambda. I think so. There's even I think in one or two of the cloud providers actually almost have a container as a service where you just give them the the Docker registry container name, and they're going to run it for you and do all that for you. But they'll create new challenges for us and new things that we need to track and to automate as we go forward. Has the waterfall approach of big releases in each quarter, et cetera, going away? I can speak for us. Yes, our goal is to get away from the big releases and to do stuff much more incrementally. Now, we still plan sometimes, and it depends on the area, and maybe a 2-month, 10-week cycle, right, to make sure we have all these things kind of come together. But if we can deploy things in smaller units, we get the feedback earlier, and there's less of a rush at the end. The other issue is if you could do it ahead of time, if you do smaller changes, the impact and the blast radius tends not to be as big. And I'll use an example where it's easier to roll back, actually. So if you deploy a small change and you just move maybe 5% or a few percent of your customers on it, and let's say that change was bad for some reason, it totally broke the functionality. Well, you just impacted them, and if you have the monitoring, you can just move that 5% back to the old version. This is kind of the incremental blue-green model. But if you do that fairly quickly in the order of minutes, you fix the problem before many people have noticed. So you can do that a lot faster and actually take on a little more risk, rather than saying, hey, we have to change 10 services and enable 10 features for a big quarterly release. To roll that back, you got to roll back the 10 other features, and usually have data involved, et cetera. So it becomes a challenge. So if you can, the big releases and getting away from them are important. Now, you do have to do some macro planning sometimes for your big migrations, but how do you break those up into some PIs and some, even month or two at the largest kind of releases. That way you can, you don't get to the end and have all the last minute kind of change at the end of a big release. see, let's find the next question. So someone asked, what comes after DevOps and after it kind of stabilizes, and where are we in 10 years and what's different? So as we grow, at some point, some of these skills become kind of ingrained, in the teams and with these platforms that the DevOps engineers will probably just be a focus in kind of like quality in the pods. And that's some of our goals, is how do we get there with some of the knowledge there, where you have maybe kind of a DevOps expert, but it's just one of your developers. There's who knows? Obviously, there's new technologies after that. Obviously, Lambdas or serverless is one of the big things that is growing, but it's how quickly are we going to get there, and how quickly can the technology mature enough for things. Serverless is definitely on the upswing of how do you monitor and how do you manage that at scale? Some people have done it well, but it's earlier in the process. Here's an interesting one. So I'm not, it's in Capital One's environment, is there a need to a dedicated cloud-based firewall, or do you find Amazon's native tools sufficient? So I'm not the security guy, but I can say with security groups and NACLs and the traceability of that, we heavily use those, and we see them, kind of being the replacement for that. The very nice thing is it's all available through the API, so we track and have a lot of automation of looking for access that shouldn't be there, changing it, and we have a full view of what connectivity is allowed to where, so we can make decisions based on risk to make sure we're doing things the right way. So the next one is, how much value do you assign to certifications, whether AWS Solution Architect or DevOps certifications when hiring new team members? So some perspective on me, I tend not to be a big certification guy. I have a few from the Java days. I will say I am AWS Solution Architect Associate level certified. I do look at it as a good thing for the Solution Architect Associate exam, because it makes you learn the basics and is very broad. And it's frankly not easy. You do need to learn the stuff to actually get it. I will say I require all my team members that work for me to get that certification as they work under me. It's not a requirement to get in, but I think it's important to know that and have that as a baseline. So I look at it as a good thing, and it's important. It is one of the higher, most valuable certifications that's out there from a compensation perspective of differentiating yourself. So that's a good thing. There's of course some people I see that come through that have the certification that don't have kind of the skills that are needed though. So there's always that. I would say the most important part about that certification though is seeing the cloud and DevOps patterns versus just kind of knowing the questions. So that's one of the things I look for is understanding the patterns. That way, as more services come online, the pattern just kind of makes sense and everything kind of fits together. I don't know how many services there are in each of the cloud providers, but it's more than anyone wants to memorize and be deep on. So if you understand the patterns and the ephemeral nature and the resiliency and how things work at a high level, all these services kind of fit into that well, and it makes it easier to work in that space. Let's see what the next question is. So is Capital One building resiliency at the app level? How much is necessary at the infrastructure level, or site replication, et cetera? So being all in the cloud, we're using the cloud tools for resiliency. So, and it's taken some time to get our head around this and everyone to understand, but The idea is we should be prepared to lose any server at any point and have the overall service keep running. So, we use the cloud technologies pretty extensively with the load balancers and auto-scaling groups and multi-availability zone and even multi-region for some things to provide the redundancy. We have some chaos engineering-like tools that we use inside in some places, and their usage are growing with, how do I kill one server for this application every hour or once a day, and to test that in a non-prod environment. So it's some of the things, different places within Capital One are more advanced than others, but it's one of the things that we're passionate about is if we do this, if we test our failover every day or every hour, we will get pretty good at it, so that way we don't have to worry about if you really do lose a server or an EC2 instance or anything in the cloud. And I will say at the scale that we are running with Amazon, we get notices from Amazon every week around servers that are integrated hardware. And, we really were worried about that, but as we've gotten better, we've known to expect it and known to say, hey, if this app is truly cloud native and fully automated, we shouldn't be worried about that at all. So. And let me see if there's one more question we can knock out, and then we'll kind of wrap it up. Stand by. This is maybe a little easier one, but are we looking to migrate our business critical applications to the cloud? So we've said this publicly, and said it here is Capital One, we are all in the cloud. And critical to business, required for all the services. Yes, we're putting those in the cloud. So we are a very big cloud user, and we have the experience and have learned over the last few years kind of how to do this at large scale rather than just a few applications that are scaled well. We have all sorts of different applications. Some are working better than others, but we're pretty comfortable at what we've gotten out of the cloud and the models, and continue to march in that direction. So that's all the time. This is the end of the webinar, but thank you everyone for joining,